In the heart of the city, Le Rêve Étoile stood as a symbol of elegance and exclusivity. Under the soft glow of chandeliers, the elite gathered to indulge in the finest culinary creations. Laughter and conversation danced through the air, blending with the gentle clinking of crystal glasses. Each table, meticulously arranged, reflected the restaurant's impeccable standards. The evening unfolded like any other until a hushed murmur swept across the room. Heads turned, conversations faltered, and a quiet buzz of excitement filled the air. "Elon Musk is here," whispered a guest, the name carrying an electric charge that rippled through the dining hall. The billionaire's arrival was nothing short of cinematic. Accompanied by a discreet but formidable security team, Musk's entrance exuded quiet authority. All eyes followed him as he made his way to his reserved table. But while the dining room basked in the presence of one of the world's most influential figures, the kitchen told a very different story. Head chef Julien, known for his genius in the culinary world, had been expertly orchestrating his team when the news reached him. He froze mid-motion, the sound of sizzling pans and hurried footsteps fading into the background. His expression darkened, his jaw set tight, as if bracing for something inevitable. "Not tonight," he said softly, but the words were laced with an unshakable finality. The sous chefs exchanged nervous glances. Julien's calm yet commanding demeanor rarely wavered, but this was different. The quiet weight of his words left an unsettling chill in the air. "Chef, what do you mean?" one of them dared to ask. But Julien's only response was a sharp glance that silenced any further questions. Back in the dining room, the guests were oblivious to the brewing tension in the kitchen. Musk sat at his table, his presence both magnetic and commanding, as though he belonged to another world entirely. Yet behind the scenes, a storm was beginning to form. Julien's refusal seemed simple enough on the surface, but there was something deeper, darker, simmering beneath. What had triggered this defiance from a man who prided himself on professionalism? No one could predict how the night would unfold, but one thing was certain. Le Rêve Étoile was about to witness an evening unlike any other. In the dining room, murmurs began to ripple across the tables. Guests exchanged puzzled glances, their conversation shifting from casual banter to speculation. A delay in service was unheard of at Le Rêve Étoile, and with Elon Musk seated at a prime table, the stakes felt higher than ever. "It hasn't been served yet," one guest whispered, craning her neck to catch a glimpse of the billionaire. "Maybe they're preparing something special for him," another replied, though their voice carried more doubt than confidence. But the whispers weren't just contained within the restaurant. A sharp-eyed diner discreetly filmed the scene, their phone capturing Musk's calm demeanor at his table and the hushed confusion around him. Within minutes, the video hit social media. "Chef refuses to serve Elon Musk at Le Rêve Étoile," read the hastily written caption. The clip spread like wildfire. Comments poured in, some shocked, others outraged, and a few even curious about the story behind the refusal. Back in the kitchen, the staff's unease grew as they scrolled through their phones, realizing the restaurant was becoming a global talking point. "You have to reconsider, chef," Anna, the pastry chef, urged, her voice a mix of desperation and fear. "This isn't just any guest. This could ruin us." Julien finally looked up, his expression as resolute as ever. "I've made my decision," he said firmly. "But why?" Marco pressed, his frustration bubbling over. "What could possibly justify this? What are you not telling us?" Julien hesitated, the mask of composure slipping for a brief moment. His hands gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white, before he took a shaky breath. "Because every time I see his name, I remember," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Remember what?" Anna asked, her voice softening. Julien closed his eyes, the memories flooding back like a tidal wave. "My son." He was on his way to Tesla, the job he was so proud of, when it happened. The accident, the call I'll never forget. And now, every time I hear that name, I see my boy, gone, because of a dream I encouraged him to chase. The kitchen fell silent, his words sinking in. No one knew what to say. Julian's pain was raw, palpable, and impossible to argue with. The tension in the dining room was palpable, a quiet storm brewing as Elon Musk set down his glass of water. His calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but his curiosity had clearly been piqued. The delay, the whispers, the sideways glances, it all pointed to something unusual, something personal. Without a word, Musk stood, his tall frame commanding attention as he moved toward the kitchen. His security team followed closely, their sharp eyes scanning the room, but he waved them back. This was something he needed to handle himself. In the kitchen, the staff froze as the door swung open. Musk stepped inside, his presence both commanding and strangely unassuming. The clatter of utensils ceased. The hiss of pans seemed to quiet, as if the room itself was holding its breath. "Chef Julian," Musk said, his tone polite yet firm. His eyes locked onto the chef, who stood rigid by the counter. "I understand you've chosen not to serve me tonight. May I ask why?" For a moment, Julian didn't respond. His hands gripped the edge of the counter, and his chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. The rest of the staff watched in stunned silence, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. "It's not personal," Julian said at last, his voice low but thick with emotion. "You've done nothing wrong. But I can't." Musk tilted his head slightly, his curiosity evident. "Can't or won't?" he asked, his voice calm, almost gentle. Julian's jaw clenched, and his eyes flickered with a pain that had long been buried but never healed. Finally, he turned to face Musk, his gaze steady but full of anguish. "My son," Julian began, his voice breaking slightly. "He was on his way to work at Tesla, his dream job. He admired you, you know, always talked about your vision, your ambition. He was proud to be part of it." Julian paused, swallowing hard. But on his way to work one morning, there was an accident. A driver ran a red light. He didn't make it. The silence in the kitchen was suffocating. Even the hum of the appliances seemed to fade as the weight of Julian's words settled over the room. "I lost him that day," Julian continued, his voice cracking, "and every time I hear your name, I see his face. I feel the guilt, the grief, the emptiness. It's irrational, I know that. You had nothing to do with what happened, but I can't escape it." For the first time, Musk's composed expression shifted, his brow furrowed, and his usually sharp eyes softened. He stepped closer, his voice quieter now. "I'm deeply sorry for your loss," Musk said, his tone sincere and measured. "I can't imagine the pain you've carried, but..." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Holding on to that pain won't bring him back. It won't change what happened. If anything, it only keeps you from healing." Julian's breath hitched, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Musk's words, though simple, struck a chord that cut through his defenses. The two men stood there, surrounded by silent onlookers, as the weight of the moment hung in the air. One was a father consumed by grief, the other a man trying to offer solace. For the first time that evening, the kitchen didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a space where understanding, however fragile, had begun to take root. But for Julian, the question remained: could he let go of his pain, or would it continue to define him? Elon Musk stood silent for a moment, his words lingering in the air between them. Then, with a nod of understanding, he turned and walked out of the kitchen. The soft click of the door closing behind him echoed in the now silent room. Julian didn't move. His hands trembled as he gripped the counter, his breath shallow and uneven. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. No one dared to break the heavy silence. In the dining room, Musk calmly returned to his table. He exchanged a few quiet words with his security team, then signaled for the check. Despite the eyes on him, the whispers, and the palpable tension, he carried himself with quiet grace. Moments later, he exited the restaurant, leaving a swirl of speculation in his wake. Back in the kitchen, Julien slumped onto a nearby stool, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on him. His team stood in hesitant silence until Marco, his sous-chef, finally spoke. "Chef," Marco began gently, "please, talk to us. We can't help if we don't understand." Julien didn't respond immediately. He stared at the floor, his shoulders heavy with the burden of unspoken grief. After a long pause, he began to speak, his voice distant and raw. "My son Luca," he started, the name trembling on his lips. He was a brilliant young man, ambitious, kind. He dreamed of changing the world. Julien's gaze drifted to the wall, where a small photograph of his son hung quietly out of sight from the restaurant floor. He was overjoyed when he got the job at Tesla. He said it was his chance to make a difference, to be part of something bigger. He couldn't stop talking about it. The room was silent, everyone hanging on his every word. "I was so proud of him," Julien continued, his voice thick with emotion. "But I was busy, too busy, always chasing my own dreams. I missed so many dinners, so many moments, thinking there would always be time." His hands gripped the edge of the counter tightly as his voice faltered. Then, one morning, on his way to work, everything changed. A car didn't stop. And just like that, he paused, the words catching in his throat. He was gone. Julien's staff stood frozen, the weight of his grief settling over them. "It's not Musk's fault," Julien admitted after a long pause, his voice barely audible. "But every time I hear his name, I'm reminded of what I've lost. It's like a wound that never heals." Marco placed a comforting hand on Julien's shoulder. "Chef, you can't keep carrying this alone. Luca wouldn't want you to punish yourself like this." Julien let out a shaky breath, his expression unreadable. Deep down, he knew Marco was right, but how could he let go of something that had defined him for so long? As the night wore on, Julien found himself alone in the empty kitchen. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph of Luca, smiling brightly with a soccer ball in his hands. For the first time in years, Julien allowed himself to cry, not just for his son, but for the time he had let slip away. It was a quiet moment, but an important one. Somewhere deep inside, Julien began to realize that his pain didn't have to define him. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a way to honor his son while finding peace for himself. The morning light streamed through the windows of Les Rêves Étoiles, casting long shadows across the empty dining room. Julien sat alone at one of the tables, a steaming cup of coffee untouched in front of him. His mind replayed the events of the previous night, the confrontation, the grief, the words he couldn't forget. A quiet knock at the restaurant door pulled him from his thoughts. Marco stepped inside, holding a cream-colored envelope with a simple but elegant handwriting on the front. "Chef Julien." "This came for you, chef," Marco said, placing it gently on the table. Julien hesitated before picking it up. The paper felt heavy in his hands, as if it carried more than just words. Slowly he opened it and began to read. "Dear Chef Julien, I wanted to thank you for your honesty last night. I cannot pretend to understand your pain, but I saw it, and I felt it. Losing someone you love leaves scars that time alone cannot heal. I also want to say I forgive you, not that you wronged me, but because I can see you're carrying a burden that's too heavy to bear alone." Sometimes we need others to remind us that holding on to pain doesn't honor those we've lost. It keeps us from living the lives they would want for us. I hope one day you find peace. Until then, know that your story has touched me deeply. Warm regards, Elon. Julien's hands trembled as he read the letter again, slower this time. The words seemed to pierce through the wall of grief he had built around himself. He folded the letter carefully, placing it on the table, and sat in silence for a long moment. When he finally stood, his shoulders felt lighter. Something inside him had shifted, and for the first time in years, he saw a path forward, not away from his grief, but through it. That afternoon, Julien gathered his staff in the dining room. The atmosphere was tense, but there was also a spark of curiosity in the air. "I've made a decision," Julien began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "For years, this restaurant has been a place of luxury, exclusivity, a sanctuary for the elite. But I've realized something I should have understood long ago. A place like this can mean so much more." The staff exchanged puzzled glances as Julien continued. "From now on, Le Rêve Étoile will host community dinners for underprivileged families and children. Once a week, this space will belong to those who've never had the chance to sit at a table like this, to those who need hope, not just a meal." A stunned silence filled the room. Then, Anna, the pastry chef, broke into a smile. "That's beautiful, chef," she said, her voice filled with admiration. Marco nodded, his own grin spreading. Luca would be proud. Julien's throat tightened at the mention of his son's name, but this time, it wasn't pain that filled him. It was resolve. The team quickly rallied behind the idea, brainstorming ways to make it happen. By the end of the day, the restaurant had transformed from a symbol of exclusivity into a beacon of hope. As Julien stood at the doorway that night, watching his staff prepare for their first community dinner, he felt something he hadn't in years. A sense of purpose. For the first time, he wasn't running from his grief. He was using it to build something meaningful. And in the quiet moments, when the dining room was empty, he glanced at the framed letter from Elon Musk hanging on the wall. It wasn't just a reminder of forgiveness, it was a call to action. A reminder that healing often begins with a single courageous choice to change. Months after its transformation, Le Rêve Étoile buzzed with life, no longer a haven for the elite, but a sanctuary for those in need. Families filled the long tables, sharing meals in a space now filled with laughter and hope. One evening, as Julien oversaw his bustling kitchen, the door chimed. When he looked up, there stood Elon Musk, dressed simply, a calm smile on his face. "Julien," Musk said warmly, extending a hand. "I heard about what you've done here. It's inspiring." Julien hesitated before shaking his hand. "Thank you. That means a lot." Musk glanced at the lively dining room. "Mind if I help out tonight? I've always wanted to see what goes on back here." The kitchen fell silent in surprise, but Julien nodded. "All right, let's see what you've got." Musk rolled up his sleeves, diving into the rhythm of the kitchen under Julien's guidance. They worked side by side, chopping, stirring, and plating, Musk blending into the team with surprising ease. Later, Musk joined the guests, chatting with families and making everyone feel seen. As the evening wound down, Julien stood to make an announcement. "This place was once known as Le Rêve Étoile," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "But today it stands for something much greater. From now on, this restaurant will be called Étoile de Luca, in honor of my son, whose memory inspires everything we do." Applause erupted, the room filled with emotion. Musk clapped along, his expression one of pride and quiet respect. Afterward, the two men sat outside under the city lights. Musk turned to Julien. "You've created something remarkable. Luca would be proud." Julien smiled, a peace he hadn't felt in years washing over him. "Thank you. But I couldn't have done it without you reminding me that pain doesn't have to define us." In that moment, Étoile de Lucca became more than a restaurant. It became a symbol of forgiveness, second chances, and the power of connection. Julien's journey is a testament to the extraordinary power of transformation. What began as a night of conflict turned into a story of redemption, where deep personal pain was channeled into something profoundly meaningful. Through the creation of Étoile de Lucca, Julien showed us that grief, no matter how consuming, doesn't have to define who we are. Instead, it can be a catalyst, a force that drives us to create, to heal, and to give back in ways we never imagined. Elon Musk's role in this story is equally powerful. His calm empathy, even when faced with Julien's raw emotions, reminds us of the importance of understanding. It takes strength to see beyond someone's anger and recognize the pain behind it. Musk's ability to offer forgiveness and support shows that kindness, even in the smallest gestures, can have a ripple effect that changes lives. This isn't just a story about a chef or a billionaire. It's a story about all of us. The struggles we carry, the pain we bury, and the incredible potential we have to turn our hardships into something beautiful. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there's an opportunity to create light. Étoile de Lucca became more than a restaurant. It became a legacy, a symbol of forgiveness and second chances, and proof that no matter how heavy the weight of our grief, it's never too late to let it go and start anew. Let this story inspire us to find hope in our struggles and empathy in our encounters with others. Sometimes, the greatest acts of healing begin with a single act of understanding. This story, though fictional, carries a message that resonates deeply with all of us. It challenges us to look inward, to confront the pain we carry, and to ask ourselves a crucial question. Can we find the courage to let go, to forgive, and to transform our struggles into something meaningful? Julien's journey is not just about grief, it's about redemption. His ability to turn personal tragedy into a beacon of hope reminds us that even in the face of immense loss, there's always an opportunity to create something beautiful. It shows us that pain, while heavy and overwhelming, doesn't have to define us. Instead, it can inspire us to connect, to heal. Elon Musk's empathy in this story is another powerful reminder. Even when faced with anger or rejection, we have the capacity to respond with understanding. Sometimes, a kind word or a forgiving gesture can be the spark that changes someone's life. While this tale is fictional, its themes are universal. It teaches us that forgiveness is a gift not just to others but to ourselves. It reminds us that no matter how deep our pain runs, it's never too late to seek peace and to turn darkness into light. Let this story inspire you to reflect on your own challenges. What burdens are you carrying, and how can you use them to build something positive? If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced the power of forgiveness, or the strength to turn pain into purpose? Let us know. We'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that uplift and inspire. Thank you for listening. Together, let's continue spreading messages of love, hope, and understanding.